It started with a child screaming in the middle of the night. Not because she had a nightmare, but because something was standing in her room, watching her. At first, her parents thought it was imagination, but 3 nights later, the house attacked them. And what happened inside this ordinary home would become one of the most violent haunting cases in British history. Because this wasn't just noises, not footsteps, not shadows. People were dragged, thrown, scratched, and even police officers would later admit something inside that house moved on its own. But the most terrifying part, who or what people believed was behind it, may have been dead for over 400 years. This is the story of the Black Monk House and the family who say it turned on them. 1974, 30 East Drive, Pontefract, West Yorkshire. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary. A simple council house, brick walls, narrow stairs, small rooms. Nothing about it looked dangerous. But that was exactly the problem, because when fear hides in plain sight, you don't see it coming. The Pritchard family moved in hoping for a normal life. Jean, her husband Joe, their children. Nothing unusual, no stories, no warnings, no reason to believe anything was wrong. But almost immediately, things began to happen. Small things, easy to dismiss at first. A cup moved across the kitchen table. Joe blamed vibration, but the table was solid. Therefore, they ignored it. Then came knocking inside the walls. Slow, 3 knocks, always at night. But when Joe checked, nothing was there. And then the children started waking up, saying someone was standing in their room, watching, not moving, just staring. At first, Joan thought it was dreams, but then her daughter described the figure. Tall, black robes, a hood, no face. And that was the first time Jean felt something shift, because she hadn't told her children what she'd seen the night before. It had happened on the landing. June had gone upstairs after hearing movement. She expected Joe, or one of the children, but instead, she saw someone standing at the top of the stairs. Completely still, tall, dark, wearing what looked like a monk's robe. She froze, and then it vanished. It didn't walk away, it just vanished, right in front of her. That should have been enough to leave, but they didn't, because people rationalize fear. They explain it until they can't. And then the violence started. Drawers flew open, bottles were thrown. A heavy chest moved across the floor by itself. Joe still didn't believe it, not fully. He thought stress, exhaustion, maybe someone playing tricks. But then he saw it himself. And after that, nothing in that house felt normal again, because what the family didn't know yet was that the land beneath their home carried its own history, a history of executions, religious violence, and buried fear. But what made that history so disturbing was how closely it seemed to mirror what was happening to them now. And as the attacks grew worse, the family would begin asking the question everyone still asks today. Was this house haunted? Or had something older been waiting there all along? It happened just after midnight. and it started with a bang so loud the whole house shook. June shot upright in bed. Joe was already awake, because whatever had hit the wall downstairs, it hadn't sounded small. It sounded heavy, violent, like furniture being thrown. Joe grabbed the bedroom door, stopped, listened. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, just silence. And somehow, that silence felt worse. He stepped onto the landing, slowly, and looked down into the darkness below. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The kitchen light was off. The front door was locked. But then, 3 knocks from directly beneath his feet, inside the floorboards. Joe froze. Because this time, it wasn't the children, it wasn't the pipes, and it wasn't outside, it was inside the house. Then came the screaming. Not Jean, not Joe, their youngest daughter, Sally. From upstairs, Joe ran back, fast, burst into her room, and found her standing on the bed, pointing at the corner. Crying, unable to speak. At first he thought someone had broken in, but the room was empty. No open window, no footprints, nothing disturbed, except Sally. She couldn't stop shaking, and when Jean finally calmed her down, she kept repeating the same words, over and over. The man in black. Not a man, the man, as if she already knew him. And then she said something that would terrify Jean. Because Sally claimed the figure had been standing beside her bed, watching her sleep, for several minutes before she woke up. That changes everything, because if she was telling the truth, it wasn't just appearing, it was waiting. Joe still refused to believe it. He said it was fear, a nightmare, a child's imagination. But that theory didn't survive the next night. Because that was the first time the house touched someone. June was alone in the kitchen, washing dishes, trying to ignore the tension, trying to pretend things were normal. And then, something hit her. Hard, across the back of the head. She spun around, nothing there, but on the floor beside her was a glass tumbler. Still rolling, still spinning, as if it had just been thrown. Joe checked every room, every window, every lock. Nothing, no intruder, no explanation. And now, he had to face the fact that whatever was in that house had just become physical. And then came the scratching. This part is often repeated in witness retellings, though some details vary, but the core account remains the same. Jung woke in the early hours, burning pain across her arm. She turned on the bedside lamp and saw fresh scratches, 3 long lines, deep, red, still bleeding. Joe saw them too, and this time he had no explanation, no prank, no dream, no accident, because Jean had gone to bed untouched and woke up marked. Skepticism is easy until something follows you into bed. And then came the moment the children stopped sleeping upstairs. One night, Sally refused to go to bed, screaming, begging, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Jean kept asking why. And finally, she pointed at the stairs and said, "He's waiting for me up there." And for the first time, Joe believed her, because standing at the top of those stairs, for just a second, he saw movement. A shape, tall, black, still, watching, and then gone. Not everybody believes that account. Some say fear was spreading through the house, that stress was shaping what they thought they saw. But if that's true, why would the violence only get worse? Because by now, the house wasn't just haunting them, it was escalating. And soon, other people would see it too. People with no reason to lie and no reason to believe. And then the stairs claimed another victim. According to later accounts, one of the Pritchard daughters suddenly screamed while climbing to bed. Jean rushed from the kitchen, expecting to find she'd tripped. Instead, she found her daughter clinging desperately to the banister. The girl was crying uncontrollably. She kept shouting that something had grabbed her. Some retellings even claim an unseen force pulled her backwards up several steps as she fought to hold on. Exactly how much of that account is accurate is impossible to verify today. The details differ depending on the source. But one thing remains remarkably consistent. The family believed the staircase had become the center of whatever was happening inside the house. From that night onwards, the children dreaded going upstairs, not because of the darkness, but because they believed something was already waiting there. By now, Joe Pritchard had stopped laughing, stopped explaining, stopped sleeping properly, because whatever was inside that house was no longer hiding, and it seemed to want one thing: attention. The knocks became constant, day and night. Not random, always deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Like something trying to communicate or warn them. At first, Joe tried to fight back. He searched the loft, checked the walls, pulled up floorboards. Nothing. No animals. No loose pipes. No hidden person. And yet the sounds kept moving, room to room, above them, below them, inside the walls. That's when Joe made a mistake. He shouted at it. He stood in the hallway, looked into the dark staircase, and said, "If you're here, show yourself." And according to later retellings, something answered. Immediately. A picture frame ripped from the wall behind him. Smashed across the floor, hard enough to splinter the wood. That was the moment Joe stopped being a skeptic, because now it was reacting, but the house wasn't finished. It wanted witnesses. Word had spread through Pontefract. Neighbors had heard the stories. Most thought it was nonsense, stress, attention-seeking, a family falling apart. until they came inside. One night, John invited her neighbor in to prove she wasn't lying, to show someone what they'd been living with. At first, nothing happened, just silence, stillness, normality. And that almost made it worse, because silence in that house had become suspicious. Then, a vase lifted from the fireplace and flew across the room. In front of both of them, the neighbor screamed, Jean screamed, and the vase shattered against the wall. No strings, no trick, no one near it, and that changed everything, because now there was another witness. Someone outside the family, someone with no reason to protect the story. After that, people started coming to the house, curious, skeptical, some mocking, some wanting proof. And that's when the house became unpredictable. Some claimed they heard footsteps overhead when no one was upstairs. Others said doors locked by themselves. One man reportedly felt his coat pulled from behind, so violently he fell backwards. Not every account can be verified. Some were passed from person to person, exaggerated over time. That matters. But what matters more is that they all describe the same pattern: escalation, aggression, a presence that seemed aware. And then came the worst attack yet. Jean was in the living room, alone, the children asleep upstairs, Joe at work. When the armchair opposite her began to shake, slightly at first, then violently, as if someone was trying to force themselves out of it. She stood up, backed away, and then the chair lifted off the floor, just inches, but enough to break something inside her. She ran straight outside, barefoot, into the street, screaming. Neighbors came running. And when they entered the house, the chair was upside down, across the room. Again, not proof, but a consistent account, repeated for decades, and by now, even skeptics were starting to ask the same question. What if something really was there? But what terrified the Pritchards most wasn't the violence. It was the pattern, because every attack seemed to focus on one place. The stairs, the landing, the room at the top. That was where the children saw it most, where the footsteps stopped, where the air turned cold, and where Joe would soon experience something he never spoke comfortably about again. Because in that room, for the first time, he claimed he saw the figure clearly, and what he described would link the house to something far older, something buried beneath it, something that may explain why this house was feared long before the Pritchards arrived, or why some believed it had been waiting for them. By now, The Pritchards had one question. Why this house? Why their family? And why did everything seem to lead back to the stairs? Joe couldn't ignore it anymore, because almost every violent event, the knocking, the footsteps, the sightings, always ended at the same place: the landing, the room above, and beneath it, the cellar. At first, it was just used for storage, cold, damp, forgotten. But Joe said there was something wrong with it, something heavy, like the air itself felt different, thicker, harder to breathe, and the deeper he stood in that room, the stronger the feeling became, like he wasn't alone. So he started digging. And that's when things got worse, fast. According to later accounts, beneath the cellar floor, Joe uncovered human bones. Small bones, scattered, mixed with older fragments, animal remains, and strange markings in the stone. Now, this part matters because there's no official archaeological record confirming exactly what was found. That must be said. But the story persisted, and once it spread, people started asking what had once stood on that land. That's when local history came into focus, and what they found was disturbing. Centuries before the house was built, the land had reportedly belonged to Cluniac monks, religious men, strict, isolated, and according to local legend, one monk had been executed nearby, hanged, for crimes never fully recorded. Some say theft, others say violence, some say far worse. No one agrees, but what people do agree on is what came after. Because after his death, stories began, dark ones, whispers of a hooded figure, seen walking the land, long before the Pritchards moved in, long before the house existed. That's important, because if those stories are true, whatever haunted the house was already there, waiting. But this is where the story becomes difficult to untangle. As the legend of the Black Monk House spread, new and increasingly sinister claims began to appear. Some writers linked the house to pagan rituals and even ancient sacrificial sites. However, there is no reliable historical evidence connecting those claims to 30 East Drive. In fact, the bones found in the cellar could possibly have come from a similar haunting in a different part of the country, with people retelling it as the Black Monk House. Many researchers now believe these darker details may have become attached to the story over time, borrowed from other famous British hauntings as the legend continued to grow. What is clear, though, is that with every retelling, the mystery surrounding the house only became darker. And whatever the truth is around this haunting, the fear that the family lived with on a daily basis was very real. Joe began researching the monk, trying to understand the figure they kept seeing, and the description matched. Tall, black robes, hooded, silent, watching. That was the exact figure Sally had described before anyone had mentioned monks, before any history had been uncovered. And that detail disturbed Joe more than anything, because if Sally couldn't have known, where had the image come from? Memory, fear, suggestion, or something standing in the room with her? And then came the cellar incident, the one Joe rarely spoke about. He was down there alone, torch in hand, looking at the floor. And then he heard footsteps above him, heavy, slow, crossing the floorboards. He called out. No answer. Then 3 knocks directly above his head. And then something slammed into the cellar door, hard enough to shake it, once, twice, again. Joe ran. Up the steps, forced the door open, and found the house empty, completely silent. But the scratches on the cellar door were fresh, deep, and there before he went down, or at least that's what he later claimed. By now, the haunting had changed. It wasn't random anymore. It felt territorial, focused, protective, as if the family had disturbed something or uncovered something. And soon, the violence would stop being hidden inside the house, because the next witnesses wouldn't be neighbors or family. They would be police, and what they reported seeing would make the Black Monk House one of the most feared homes in Britain. But even now, one question remains. Was this a haunting, or had history, religion, and folklore merged into the perfect story of terror? Because from here, things only became harder to explain. By now, the Pritchards were living in fear, not of what they knew, but of what might happen next. Because the house had changed. The attacks became more violent, more frequent, and harder to hide. Furniture moved in daylight, doors slammed without warning, heavy objects were thrown, and the children stopped going upstairs completely. But the most terrifying event was still to come. One night, Jean was asleep in bed, Joe beside her. The house was quiet for once, still, calm. And then Jean woke screaming because something had grabbed her leg hard and was pulling her out of the bed. Joe woke instantly, saw her halfway off the mattress, saw the blanket tightening around her ankles as if someone was dragging her. But there was no one there. He grabbed her arms, pulled back. This lasted for several seconds. Jean later claimed it felt like something was pulling against him, fighting him, trying to take her. Then it stopped, instantly, like letting go. No one can prove that happened, but Joe never denied it. And after that night, he stopped sleeping in that room. That attack spread fast, and eventually, it reached the police. At first, they dismissed it. Domestic stress, false reports, a frightened family. But when officers entered the house, things reportedly happened in front of them. This is one of the most repeated parts of the Black Monk case, and while details vary, multiple versions tell the same story. An officer stood in the hallway questioning John when a glass was thrown across the room by itself, and it was thrown hard enough to smash against the wall. Another officer later claimed he saw a chair move, just slightly, but enough to stop laughing, enough to leave shaken. There are no official police records publicly proving these exact events, but these accounts have survived for decades, and their consistency is part of what keeps the case alive, because once police are involved, the story changes. It stops being private and becomes legend. Soon, researchers arrived, paranormal investigators, journalists, skeptics, all wanting to see the Black Monk house for themselves, and many left with stories, cold spots, knocks, objects moving, the feeling of being watched. Some saw shadows, some heard breathing, some refused to stay. But here's where it gets complicated, because not all of that proves haunting. Far from it. Psychologists would later suggest something else: mass suggestion, fear contagion, sleep deprivation, shared expectation, a family under stress, neighbors feeding the story, and over time, belief shaping experience. And that matters, because fear changes perception, and once a house gains a reputation, every sound becomes sinister. Every shadow becomes a threat. Every silence becomes loaded. That could explain everything, or none of it. And that's what makes Black Monk House so difficult, because the facts are real. The Pritchards lived there. They made the claims. The violence was reported. Witnesses came forward. The story spread. That part is undeniable. But the cause? That remains buried. Maybe in the house. Maybe in the history. Maybe in the mind. Was it the spirit of an executed monk? A darker force tied to older rituals? A family trapped inside escalating fear? Or something far simpler? No one knows, and that uncertainty is exactly why the house still matters. Because unlike many hauntings, Black Monk never fully faded. People still visit, still investigate, still ask the same question: what was in that house? And maybe the most disturbing thought is this: if it was all imagination, why do so many people tell the same story? And if it wasn't, what was standing at the top of those stairs, watching, waiting, long before the family ever moved in? And if you had to spend one night there, would you? If you enjoyed this video, I'd be grateful if you could give it a like, and even better, if you could subscribe so that you don't miss the next tale from the Hag Raven. Thanks for watching. Take care, and in a bit.